Welcome to It Started With a Kick, the podcast in which well-known fans and leading figures from the world of football talk to us about the first match they ever attended. I'm your host, Richard Foster, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Jen Offord. Jen is a writer, producer, and host of the Standard Issue podcast, which describes itself as by women, for women, about everything, which is pretty all-encompassing, I would have said. Jen is also a writer, and in 2022, almost exactly 2 years ago, I looked up, she had her book, The Year of the Robin, published, which is all about Charlton Athletic, and it charts their return to the Championship in 2019, which, spoiler alert, it did not end that well. But as our first starting point, we're going to go to the Valley, and it's April 2002. So, Jen, over to you.
Yeah, so this is the first match that I ever went to, and I've written about it in the book, actually. And the funny thing about this match, although I remember the atmosphere and the events leading up to it very well, I don't actually remember who it was against or what the score was, although I have subsequently, for the purposes of writing my book, been through the games that season and deduced by a process of elimination that it must have been Southampton. And indeed, Rich has just showed me, you've just showed me the programme from the match, which I recognise very well. So it's now been officially confirmed that that was the first match I went to. So I started sort of supporting Charlton in a sort of, I don't know, quote unquote serious way around 97, 98, something like that. My brother Michael supported them, and he's a couple of years older than me, 18 months older than me, and so he had been to a few matches. Basically, we were born in Sidcup, the glamorous location of Sidcup, and we lived in Charlton for like the first 6 years of my life, and then we moved out to Essex, in a town which is kind of like closest clubs would be Ipswich Town and Colchester United, and Charlton were kind of like around the same sort of league as Ipswich. We sort of were kind of in and out of what was then League One, which is now the Championship, and both got sort of promoted a bit and relegated a bit. And some of us more than others, but but basically my brother supported Charlton, which I think for him was kind of like a bit of an identity thing to sort of mark himself as different. And I was basically just very contrary teenager, and decided that supporting a London club, one that was sort of at odds with the local team, I guess, or in the same league as the local team, would make me like a bit exotic or something like that. So that is how I came to support Charlton. Now, obviously, when you are living in that part of the world, or indeed any part of the world, you don't come across too many Charlton Athletic fans. Although I think everyone knows someone who supports Charlton. But yeah, in that part of the world, few and far between. The only person who I knew who wanted to go and watch Charlton Athletic was my brother. And he was just like, "You're not coming with me. It's not going to happen. Sorry." Which I think was a bit like, I think it was a bit of it was, I don't want you to sort of cramp my style, little sister. Fair enough. I think part of him sort of wanted it for himself. Also fair enough. But the excuse that he gave me, and I defend my brother because he's not a misogynist, so I don't think he will really have meant it. But the excuse that he gave me at the time was that I would ask too many questions. And so he wasn't prepared to spend a match explaining things to me.
Right.
So basically, the first match that I went to came about because Michael and I were both at university at the same time. He'd had a couple of years out. He was in the first year when I was in the first year. And it was his 21st birthday. And so I wanted to get him. So back in the day, like anyone who's sort of similar vintage to me will remember like what you did and your siblings. You bought them like a CD or a DVD or something
Of
like that.
course.
And I was
Yeah.
like, it's 21st birthday. I want to buy him something special. I
Mhm.
knew that he would be getting from my mum tickets to go and see Charlton.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what I'll do is, bearing in mind it's 2002,
Hmm.
um, I'll buy him this really thoughtful present so he can have a lovely day out in London.
Right.
I'll get him tickets for the Millennium Eye, the London Eye.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So
Right.
I was
Okay.
like, I'll get him two tickets for that, and he can have a lovely day out. He can take like his friend or whatever, and they can go on the London Eye, and then they can go to Charlton afterwards. Great times. And I genuinely thought this was inspired. And I handed it over to him, the envelope, on his 21st birthday. And he opened it up. I got there a bit later. He was a bit pissed already. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. He was a bit drunk
Mm.
already.
Wow.
And he opened it and he was like, what the F is this? I hate London and I hate
Oh,
heights.
oh.
What?
So
What?
hang on a minute, Jen. Can I just pick you up here? So
Yeah,
he's 21. You're
yeah,
18 months younger than him. You
yeah.
didn't realise he didn't enjoy heights.
I
You know, when he was
I
talking
don't
about your
think it's true.
inquiring mind and you would ask
Yeah,
too many questions, you obviously hadn't asked enough questions of your brother at that stage.
I don't think he was ever particularly scared of heights. So I
Okay.
don't know where this had come from. I was like, this is brand new information to me, as is that you don't like London. Like what? Anyway,
Yeah.
so he was just like, what is this? This is rubbish. And I was devastated because I genuinely thought it
Yeah.
was a really good present. I was really sad. And to this day, I don't know what happened. I don't know if my mum was a bit like, come on, you're a bit hard on your sister, or if he just got there by himself. But basically, like a week later, he phoned me from university and said, "Oh yeah, wasn't my finest hour," kind of thing. Um, to apologise for this slight against your present, I'd like to offer to take you to the London Eye and the Charlton match with me. You can be like my plus one kind of thing. And I was like, oh, that's nice. Um, so that's what happened. And then in the event when we went on the London Eye, I'd been out the night before and I was very, very hungover and I sort of sat on it
Ooh,
like this.
never a good
And
idea.
he was up against the window being like, oh, look, you can see this, you can see that, like, blah, blah, blah. Isn't this fun? And I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
just
yeah.
like, oh, make it stop. Um, so yeah, so that is how I came to go to my first ever Charlton Athletic match, which was apparently against Southampton.
So, sorry, just to confirm this. So, you went to the London Eye in the morning.
Yep.
You were hungover. He got over his issue with vertigo or whatever, and
Yeah.
he was doing the
No
tour and saying,
problem.
"Oh, look, you can see the Shard." The Shard didn't exist then, but
Yeah.
anyway, you can see this. You can see BT Tower, as they used to call it.
Tower
But
of London, I
you,
think, was the thing that he
Tower of
was like, oh,
London,
I can
Tower
see this.
Bridge, yeah, all
Yeah.
that stuff. You were too hungover to really appreciate it,
Hmm.
and then so you went from the London Eye to the Valley. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything in between? You didn't take in that as a Parliament
No,
or
I
anything
don't think
else?
we would
No.
have done that. I'm pretty sure we would have just gone straight to London Bridge and like
Yeah.
jumped on the train to Charlton from
Okay.
there.
That's good. I like that. I'd like to step back, as I often do in this podcast, because you said you started to follow Charlton around 97, 98. Now, funnily enough, one of Charlton's greatest games
Yeah.
was at the end of that season. So, I mean, for people who don't realise, we can fill them in because it is probably still the greatest playoffs final that's ever been played. And
Everyone says it, and
so
you're the expert, Richard. So,
well, I
you
do
know,
know a little bit about it. Yeah, I have researched it quite thoroughly, and you don't get many 4-4 draws. Clive Mendonca's scored the first hat trick in the playoff final. I mean, we could go on, but
is that
were you aware of it? Yeah, yeah, that was the first
is that
in.
so? Because I went around for years telling a non-fact.
Oh
It's not
God,
true, but I think what you've just said is like sort of maybe where it came from. I was going around for years saying Clive Mendonca's one of three men to have scored a hat trick at Wembley. It's not true. There's not that many, but that is
no,
not a fact. But I wonder if my confusion was that he's the only person to have scored a hat trick in a playoff final. Maybe that's
he was the first.
the
That he has
first.
been followed by Scott
Mm.
Sinclair and Jermaine Beckford, funnily enough. But the first was obviously, well, I'm assuming Jeff Hurst was the first because we won something called the World Cup, I think,
Yeah.
back in '66 roughly. So he was the first, and I'm trying to think of any other hat tricks in FA Cup finals, which was generally when people played. Anyway, we could go down that rabbit hole. We're not going to. But we're going back to Charlton. But yeah, did you remember watching that game on television? I'm talking about the Charlton Sunderland 4-4 penalties, Michael
Yeah.
greatness. Do you remember watching it or
I
taking it
remember
in
it
somehow?
happening, but I didn't watch it because the thing is, I'd supported them for like at least a season prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've been pushing for promotion for a couple of years, and I didn't watch that match because how old was I? 15 when it happened.
Yeah.
So Michael was sort of old enough to go to the pub. I
Yes.
was not. And I couldn't go with him because he
Okay.
wasn't actually 18. So
No.
he could go
Okay.
as a
Yeah.
17-year-old, but I couldn't go with him because he wasn't 18 or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like the pub that he like we were known, our family was known to the pub that he went to, so they would have known that
Yes.
whatever. Anyway, details. So basically the way we had followed the season prior to that, because this is like, back in the day, we didn't have Sky, and I'm not sure you could even watch League One matches on Sky at the time. But we didn't have Sky. So we used to listen to Five Live and watch it on teletext. So you'd be waiting for the page to load to see if anything had happened. See, that's how I watched it. I watched it on teletext and listened to it on Five Live while my brother was down the road at the pub.
Right. That's an interesting combination. I must say, I'm old enough to remember teletext. Some of our younger listeners might think we're
No,
talking gobbledygook.
yeah.
But it was just scrolling information on a television, basically. But I've never done the combination of listening on the radio and watching because I would get confused by that. And as you say, there would be a delay and a gap. And I'm
I think
not
the
sure.
reason I did it is because that is how we followed. So it makes more sense when you're doing it on like a sort of, a league weekend because there's lots of
Yeah.
matches going on and you want to see
Yes.
what's happening and how it's going to affect the table, etc., etc. So that is like how we would have done it week in, week
Got
out.
you. Yeah.
So I probably just did it like that because it didn't actually occur to me that there was a reason why you would do both. And actually, if it's just one match, it's not really necessary to do both. But yeah, probably
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
force of habit.
Indeed. And so your brother, who's possibly 17, had gone to the pub. Do you remember him returning in a happy state?
Yes, he was
Yes.
delighted. Yeah,
Delighted stroke pissed.
delighted. I don't remember. I imagine
Oh,
he was pissed, but I don't remember him being pissed. But I do remember how happy he was, and I do remember it being. So he has a friend Ben, who wasn't really into football, hadn't sort of
no.
adopted a local club. So for reasons that I still don't fully understand, he kind of adopted Charlton as his club. So Michael and Ben had gone
Mm-hmm.
to watch the match in the pub, and yeah, I suspect they were refreshed, as they say. But I just remember, you know, the euphoria, this like, amazing kind of we're going to be in the, as it was then, the Premiership. Like we're going to be, we're going
Yeah.
to be in the top flight. This is like amazing. We're going to play clubs that people care about and have heard of, and
Not Colchester United, for
not
example.
Colchester United. I don't think we were in the same. I think it was quite a long time after our sort of spiral. In fact, I'm not
Yeah.
sure if we have been in the same league as Colchester United during my time as a fan.
No, I mean, you might have coincided possibly in League One. I mean, Colchester actually went out of the league and had to come back in again.
Yeah,
So my knowledge of Colchester's history is not as strong as it should be. But
mine
I
isn't
have
great, to be
interviewed someone
honest.
about Colchester, but this didn't come up, unfortunately. So going back, so there you are with your brother going to the Valley.
Yeah.
Um, and I know you've already said your memory of the match is pretty sketchy, but that's fine. What I'm more interested in is the environment, the atmosphere, the walk to the ground, and how that affected you.
Yeah, it was really like it was a very emotional experience. Like I remember the atmosphere vividly. I'm pretty sure we were sat in the family bit,
Hmm.
probably because my mum had bought tickets, and I mean, to be honest, I'm fine with that. That,
Yeah.
if you've not been to a football match before, maybe maybe the covered end is not the place you want to be
Yeah.
uh, on a match day as a sort of, pretty new to football 19-year-old or whatever I was at the time. So I'm pretty sure we're in the family bit,
Hmm.
and I remember like the hilarity in inverted commas of some guy using very bad language and then realizing that he was sat next to like a family with two small children, and the
Hmm.
children being like very amused by it and the parents being like a lot better spirited about it than I would have been. so,
Yes.
so
Yes.
I remember that, and I remember just like, it felt the capacity has increased since then. I think the capacity now is like 27,000,
Hmm.
or is it more than that now? And it was 27,000 then. I don't know.
I think it's actually, yeah. I think it was probably 27,000 because the actual
Yeah.
crowd for that Southampton game was
Mm.
26,500. So
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's actually increased
Yeah.
for
But I mean,
the
that's
more
that's
recent
amazing.
games.
If the capacity was 26,500, then
Yeah.
you don't get numbers anywhere like that at the Valley now. And I think
No.
that's a point worth making. But yeah, about how this kind of descent from the top flight really does affect a club and its,
Hmm.
ability to generate revenue and the interest in it and all of that. So like it's kind of astonishing for me to hear now that that it was almost at capacity. So yeah, 27,000, yeah, it must be a bit more than that now.
Hmm.
Because there was a new stand built at some point in the 2000s, like during that kind of Premier
Hmm.
League time.
Yeah.
So it, yeah, it felt like, I've obviously subsequently been to much bigger stadiums,
Hmm.
but it felt like a huge number. And actually, by London standards back then, it was a big stadium. Like
Yeah.
the capacity of other stadiums wasn't that big, but it's only really since, recent kind of developments that
Yeah.
there are these kind of more mega
Mega
stadiums now.
stadiums. Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, so it was considered a decent sized stadium at the time, and it's a lovely place. Like it's a really lovely stadium. Like it's not, it's a good one.
Mm.
It's a decent size. It's packed out. It's a very warm and friendly place, and they've gone to great efforts really to make it that way. And I think like, it was emotional because it was like, I'd wanted to go for a while. I'd had no one to go with because my brother wouldn't let me go with him. And
Yeah.
it's like that feeling of belonging, isn't it? That feeling of being part of something. Someone who I spoke to over the course of writing the book, Richard Wiseman, who's involved in the Charlton Athletic Supporters Trust.
Yeah, I've had communication with him. Very, very helpful man. Yeah,
Yeah,
provides a
lovely
lot of
guy.
data on Charlton. Yeah.
So he like in his kind of, I think he's retired now, but he does like he's a celebrant at
Hmm.
funerals basically as a sort of
Hmm.
part-time thing, and he says he's
Hmm.
not a religious man, but like he doesn't have a particular faith that he follows or whatever, but he kind of understands like the community of a church. And
Hmm.
that's sort of what you get from football as well, in a way. It's like that sort of coming together to celebrate like almost a higher purpose than yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like obviously that's a bit of
Yes.
a grandiose way of putting it, but But yeah, I think that there is something about that community of football, especially with a club like Charlton, where the fans are so integral and have played such a big part in the club's past in terms of, saving it from oblivion more than
Hmm.
once. Getting back to the Valley, back to the stadium after a period out of the stadium, cleaning it up. Like the fans are, I think, so integral to the heart of any football club, but with Charlton, there's just like very obvious examples of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it really does feel like a warm and special place to be, and certainly that was like my experience of it at the time.
Yeah, and you said it's grandiose about the idea of this sort of community thing, but actually, it is. I think it's the basic building block for a football club.
Mm.
Charlton, as you say, have been through some pretty rough times. Getting turfed out of the Valley wasn't great. I mean, I have to tell you now, Jen, I'm a Palace fan, so we welcomed
Ooh.
you with open arms. Shouldn't have told you that. We welcomed you with open arms at Selhurst Park, and you were a bit miffed about it. We're trying to be nice guys, but then lots of people talk about football as a religion.
Mm.
Going back to that, and actually, although you think, oh, come on, that's not, it is because there's blind faith in there. There is lots of different religions, as in lots of different clubs who will be sporting, and the passion and the devotion are things that you get in religion, and also you get some extremists on the edge
Yeah.
who you think, well, that's, I don't want to be associated with you, which I've been through as a football fan over many years, and sometimes I just thought I don't want to be here because it's just horrible. Through, you're probably too young, but there was the violence of the sort of late
Yeah.
'70s, '80s was
Mm.
not, it was not a nice place to be. And you say that warmth and the cohesion. Nah, there wasn't any of that. Well, there was a bit, but it was well hidden by this slightly
Is
over
that
aggressive behaviour.
is that something that, because obviously, yeah, I am a bit too young to remember that, but obviously I've heard about it. We all know about like the gosh, can't remember what it's called now, but the inquiry and the report after Hillsborough.
Yeah,
And there was a lot of sort of fuss and concern about hooliganism at the time.
yeah.
And but I thought it was kind of like very much associated with specific clubs rather than a kind of wholesale problem.
It was the Taylor report that came
Yes,
out
that's
after
right. Yeah.
Hillsborough, and then pushed for all-seater stadiums, which lots of us are used to now. I would actually have to say there were elements of nearly every football club which
Mm.
were there for not just to watch the football. Um, so I remember following Palace, when they were in the lower divisions, and we went to places like Grimsby and Shrewsbury, which there was, you always saw a bit of trouble. It was part and parcel of it. I
Mm.
never, I obviously removed myself, and you could see what was going to happen because you go by train, you come into the station, and then
Yeah.
you see some locals hanging around for as one of Palace fan once said to me, to go and swap programs, which was a bit of a euphemism for a punch up. But it did happen everywhere. Pretty much, there was always something going on. I
Mm.
mean, not on a massive scale. It might be, five or six blokes. They could have gone down the pub on a Saturday night and had a fight, but this was something that they pretty much knew they'd get somebody who'd be on for it. So it was. I mean, I would not have taken. I've taken all my children to football, um, and I would not have done that if I'd have been in that
Yeah.
position when it was at its height, because although you're probably not going to get involved, it's not a good thing to see as
You
a sort
sure?
of
Yeah.
poisonous atmosphere. And you don't want your kids to see people belting each other. It was terrible actually. And although, as I say, you could avoid it, sometimes you got mixed up in it, and it's not good. So
I mean, at,
you
at
know,
Charlton, I have. I mean, I've got I've got a story about the other playoff final, which I'll tell
yes,
you shortly, I'm sure. But like at the Valley, I have seen like a punch up once, which was between two Charlton fans.
yeah,
I've never heard anything overtly racist. I've heard some people say some stupid,
Yeah,
some stupid things that I suspect they didn't consider to be racist, just in a conversation between them. But I've never heard anything overtly racist. I've never heard anything overtly sexist. I've heard something a little bit homophobic,
mm,
but again, like only once. So I do think that in general, the crowd at Charlton are pretty well behaved. And I do think that that is something that they've made a real, the club has made a real conscious effort to make it a place where people feel comfortable to go. I've bought season tickets for next season for me and my daughter, who's about to turn 4.
okay.
She'd never been to a men's football match before, but she'd been to a couple of women's football matches at the Emirates. Um, but I feel completely like we will be in the family section, obviously, but I feel
Yeah,
completely comfortable to take her to Charlton, age 4. I'm not like
absolutely.
in any way worried about what she would be, exposed to there.
Yeah, no, and that's a good thing about modern football. I mean,
Mm,
there are lots of things that are not so good about modern football and put you off. And this isn't about, saying, oh, but in the old days it was
mm.
better. It's more about, being realistic about what's changed. But yeah, I would be very happy to take a young person to football now, and I go with my son regularly.
Any club,
So
like, would you feel, for example, like, would you go to West Ham with a small child? Would you go to Chelsea with a small child? Like,
I think now, yes. Certainly in the old days, no chance. Upton
mm,
Park was a particularly hostile environment. They
yeah,
had a thing called the Chicken Run, which was down one of the sides of the ground, and basically there were people there who would tear their heads off chickens. I don't think that was why it was called the Chicken Run, but they were aggressive. They were also very close to the pitch. They used to have a go at the players, and quite
yeah,
a few players I've spoken to. So there's a guy called Stuart Robson who played for Arsenal. His first match was at Upton Park, and he's a right back, and he's getting pelters, and he's going. He was only 17. He's thinking, what's going on here? But
mm,
I would take a young child to the London Stadium now for West Ham. I'd take them to Stamford Bridge. I mean, I've been to Stamford Bridge a few times at Palace when it wasn't nice. It was just this threat of violence.
yeah,
I'm not saying it was all one-sided, because there are obviously Palace fans who probably were thinking, right, okay, we can have a go at Chelsea or whatever. But that has gone as far as I mean. There's still smatterings of it, because there are still people who sometimes, for some reason, want to fight. I've never understood that, being a bit of a pacifist and not really enjoying anything like that. But yeah, I agree. I think you're more than welcome at most football clubs. There's not going to be anything untoward. So yeah,
mm.
well, I hope your daughter enjoys her season ticket at Charlton.
She's about to learn some tough lessons in life.
Yeah, yeah, and some interesting language, no doubt. But
Mm,
if I could just return to your first match, which is say 13th of April 2002
mhm.
at the Valley. Now, there are a couple of things that I wanted to pick up with you. So, Richard Rufus, who was a Charlton legend, I think he was
Yes,
player of the season a couple of times,
yeah,
he actually scored in the 17th minute. Now, if we go back to your 1998 playoff final, I will always
yeah.
bring up playoff finals because I know a bit about them. Richard Rufus scored his first goal for Charlton in that match when, with only about 3 minutes to go, Sunderland were 3-2 up, thinking, okay, we're going to go up. Richard Rufus pops up, scores his first goal for the whole, in his career at Charlton, goes to 3-3. Mendonca gets his hat trick, blah, blah, blah. So for him to get this goal was, a nice link with that
Mm,
game that you remember,
mm,
watching on teletext and listening to Five Live. The thing is about Richard Rufus is he then scored an own goal with 5 minutes to go, and it ended
mm,
Charlton 1, Southampton 1. So he had the joy of that, and then he had the slight despair. And we're not going to go into too many details, but his life has followed that, where he was a
Hero to
Charlton
villain.
legend. Hero to villain. Maybe his autobiography will be similarly titled. But he did also, because he scored that goal in the playoff final, clearly a hero. He goes, Charlton's first game up in the Premier League then was away to Newcastle. And I've written a couple of them. I'm not just a playoff freak. I also have written a few books, and one's called Premier League Nuggets. And I remember researching this. Charlton's first game away to Newcastle, which has got an irony because you beat Sunderland in the final, then you go and play their rivals in your first Premier League match. Richard Rufus gets sent off and is one of only 3 players up to the point when I wrote my book that had ever been sent off on their club's debut in the Premier League.
I think
Richard.
I think I vaguely remember that actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, he was a Charlton Athletic legend. I don't remember too much about that time. I know, like, you know, he used to get a few goals. And he was with the club for a long time. And obviously, as you say, he's had quite a spectacular fall from grace in a variety of ways. But I feel like he was always a bit like that. Like, you know, you didn't necessarily know what you were going to get.
No.
Like, he could score a goal, but, you know, there were other indiscretions.
Yeah, and as I say, we're not going to go into too many details, but we were talking about religion earlier.
Yeah.
He got involved with the church that wasn't necessarily
the
sort of church we would normally say. Anyway, we're not going to go into that. One other thing that I always talk to people about, and it's quite interesting to see how much you remember about it, is the kits.
Yes.
So Charlton's kit, which, let's face it, hasn't really changed very much, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. So it's the red shirts, the white shorts. Was that something that struck you when you went with your brother Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember because there's two kit sponsors of that kind of era that were quite sort of iconic by Charlton Athletic standards. Like, so everyone will remember, like, obviously with Arsenal, it's like the JVC kit, like, you know, way back when. And I think that the Vigeland shirt sponsor was kind of like Charlton's JVC. Obviously, like a much earlier than that, they had the Woolwich Bank sponsor them, which is also like quite an iconic. Does that even exist anymore, the Woolwich Bank? I don't think so. Anyway,
I very much doubt it.
Yeah, but I think that so they used to. That was like a lot earlier. I think that was probably like 80s, 90s kind of time. But yeah, there was a kit sponsor, Vigeland, which was quite an iconic shirt. And there was one that was mesh, which I think might have been later on. So I get very confused about which one was when, but I do remember those shirts from that period quite vividly. And when you go to the Valley now, they have within the Valley there is a Charlton Athletic Museum, which I would recommend to anyone who is obviously interested in the history of Charlton Athletic, but also the history of football in general. They have an incredible archive there of stuff that they just sort of managed to salvage when the club sort of, you know, went back to the Valley, because everything had just been left like as it was, that it had just been sort of abandoned and everything had just been left. So they've got all of this like incredible archive of stuff of, you know, like 100 years old or whatever. So because the Valley is like over 100 years old now. So they've got all of this stuff. It's amazing. And they have this like row of kits and all of those like iconic shirts along the wall. It's really like, it's a really nice thing to go and see.
So that's probably going back to Richard Wiseman, who you mentioned earlier. So he was probably the curator of.
I'm not sure it was him. I think it's someone else actually. There's a group of old boys who run the museum who've been very very kind and generous with their time to me, and you know, and sold my book in the museum and things like that. So we love the Charlton Athletic Museum, basically. Big fan.
Good. Well, you can't rely on the publishers' marketing departments because they don't really exist anymore. Sorry, everyone. But actually, looking at the programme, this is why it's quite useful to have the programme. The sponsor
is that Kinsella on the front?
Yeah, Mark Kinsella, the very man. One thing that struck me is the match sponsor, who are called the Demolition Company Partnership, which is it's an interesting start to your life as a football fan. But then it's actually Red Bus is the sponsor.
Oh, it's that, is it? Okay, I do remember. I do remember Red Bus as well.
And it was a Le Coq Sportif kit.
Yeah.
And the thing I liked about it when I saw it was the Charlton logo's on the shirt, which is pretty normal. But here, people obviously won't see this, but it's on the shorts as well. I quite like that detail. So it is indeed Mark Kinsella who has a little column in the programme as well. So Red Bus, red and white, and as it is in the title of your book, The Year of the Robin, because see, Charlton have got a couple of nicknames.
Yeah, Robin is not the most well-known one. The reason for that is because it just made sense within the context of the title. It is one of their less used nicknames, to be fair, although they do have a Robin mascot and a Valiant Knight as well, because we are also the Valiants.
Yes.
So obviously the most widely known Charlton nickname is the Addicts, which fact fans is from a guy who used to sell fish and chips after the match, and he would shout out haddock, as in like, I'm selling some haddock. And so, but in his Southeast London accent, it sounded like he was saying addict instead of haddock. So that is how they came to have the nickname the Addicts. So Year of the Addict doesn't really work.
No.
And Year of the Haddock doesn't really work if you don't know that story. So Year of the Robin just made the most sense in terms of a, usable kind of link. Yeah,
absolutely. And I hadn't heard the story about. I'd always thought it's a bit of an odd nickname, the Addicts.
Yes, it's quite close to addict.
So. Yes, exactly. So you're thinking that's not necessarily what you want to be associated with. But I suppose you do need a different nickname when you've got the Robins, because Swindon are also Robins. The Valiants, I think Port Vale might be known as the Valiants as well. Possibly, so you've got to have your own distinctive one. And to talk related to a fish and chip shout, it's top notch. Needs a bit of salt on it, no vinegar. I'm not a big fan of vinegar with it. So I do like little facts like that because they keep you going, don't they? And as you say, I will visit the Charlton Museum on your recommendation. I probably won't wear a Palace shirt because it wouldn't go down that well.
I wouldn't, but yeah. But
as a football journalist, independent, I'll just go down and have a look, because I think there is, as you say, over 100 years. That is quite a history, a legacy, and you can go through.
They've got like the club's account books and stuff like that from 80 years ago and stuff like that, which I think I studied history at university. I love that kind of stuff. But if you were, it's not the book that I was ever going to write. But if anyone were to write, a history of the money in football, for example, there you go. It's all there for you. Yeah, it's all there for you at the Charlton Athletic Museum.
You probably wouldn't want the accounts of the last couple of years, would you?
Anyway, no, well, you would, but probably the less said about that, the better, because I'm very angry with Manchester City today, so, as I think most people, most football fans are. So the tyranny of majority, eh? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, where they dragged that up from, well, I sort of roughly knows.
Also known as democracy, but
anyway. Yeah, we're not going to go down there because we could be there for a while.